Hey everyone. Uh, I wonder if other people have had this experience. And it's basically where you see a movie trailer, probably as a kid, and for some reason you don't see the actual movie for a very long time. Maybe you weren't old enough to see the movie or just slipped your mind or whatever. And then many years later, that memory of that trailer in your childhood brain has built the movie up to something it could never live up to, and then you finally see the movie. This has happened for two movies with me, and I plan to make videos for both, but this is the first one. Where you basically have a trailer expectation, and then years go by before you see the movie, and then you actually see the movie, and what does it do? So the movie I'm going to talk about just had one of its anniversaries, not one of like 10 or 20 or major ones. But I only saw this on my Facebook feed that it was the anniversary of this movie. And by complete coincidence, while I'm going through my old collection quarantine viewing to keep myself from being bored and depressed, I had actually watched it like 3 nights prior again. And not the first time I've seen it, but a while. So the movie is Brainscan. Brainscan, a horror movie released in 1994. So I would have been about 10 or 11, depending on what part of the year it came out. So I think I was actually 10 if it came out in April. Yeah, so I saw the trailer for this movie, or maybe even the TV commercials, when I'm at 10, about. And then I don't think I actually saw this movie until I was like 18 or 19. Now, when I was 10, that was the age that my mother first started letting me see R-rated movies in the theater, and I had seen some, obviously, either edited for TV or on HBO or whatever beforehand. And the age of 10 is when I first started really getting into movies. Like, that's when I got my subscription to Entertainment Weekly. That's when I started learning about like filmmaking and learning all the nooks and crannies until I became a movie-obsessed loser who got a degree in film studies that I can't get a job with. You know, that guy. That's when kind of all that started. Now, this movie, the Blu-ray that I'm holding, it has a trailer, a teaser trailer, a theatrical trailer, and TV spots on it. None of them are the ones I remember of this movie, so I don't know if I'm imagining something, but I remember a trailer that specifically ended with the line from this character that says, "Game over, you lose," which is a line in the movie. But it's like a stinger at the end after the title comes up in the credits. But it's not one of the trailers here because they don't end with that line on this Blu-ray, so there must be some other trailers out there or some other TV commercials that were cut out there of that. So I don't quite remember everything that was in that trailer. I just remember that the trailer basically portrayed the basic setup of the movie, which is that you have a teenage horror fan who likes video games. Remember, this is 1994, so video games looked like, what, Nintendo 64 and Sega CD? I don't even remember the timeline. I'm not as big a retro gamer as I am a movie guy. But it's about a kid who gets a video game, horror movie fan, and it's a video game that lets you murder people from a POV of a murderer. Which, I mean, there's plenty of games like Doom and whatever, but this was like a virtual reality kind of thing where you could feel like you were the killer and you're actually like stalking and slashing. It's not like a shoot 'em up or anything like that, and you're the bad guy, the murderer. And I thought that was an intriguing concept if it ends up being real, which is the caveat of the movie, that this kid thinks he's playing a really realistic murder video game, like a virtual reality thing, and it ends up being real. Now, from what I do remember of that trailer, and I don't know why it stuck with me for so long, and I don't know why I waited so long to actually see the movie, I think it just kind of slipped my mind and I remembered it again, was that it seemed like this idea of you basically had this new, like they're trying to create a new Freddy Krueger or a new whomever, with this guy whose name ended up being Trickster, shitty name, but whatever, who comes out of the TV and is like urging him to kill and is like tricking him into thinking it's not real when it is. And I thought he was going to put on like a VR headset, and I don't know what I was thinking the movie was about, but basically that there was that basic setup, and the especially the horror movie fan in the making really was into it. But then I didn't see the movie. I mean, it bombed in theaters, so it probably wasn't in my showcase cinemas in Rhode Island when I was 10 years old that long. And when I was 10, My mother wasn't, she never liked horror movies, so she was always reluctant to take me to those particular movies. But eventually she either relented, or my father at the time, he wasn't in my life when I was 10, but later when I was like 13 and stuff, he would take me to some of those. So it probably just skipped it then, and then why didn't I rent it? I don't know. And then it never seemed to show on television in syndication either, or on HBO or anything, so I think years later, after high school, I was probably early in college, and then I saw it at like Hollywood Video, back when video stores were a thing, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. That trailer was really cool. I wonder how that movie ended up turning out. And then I saw the movie. So, a few things about the movie. The movie is, and having watched it again a couple nights ago, there's even more things I've noticed now that I probably wouldn't have back then, when the 90s were still a little close, because I was 18 in like 2001, 2002. So, the movie's hella 90s. It's, the best friend is like the flannel with the leather jacket, and yeah, it's really, it's very, like, I won't call it dated, but it's very much of its time. And the idea of like the video game and like the little CD-ROM that he puts in his little like horrible gateway PC or whatever it is, it's funny. But I guess when I watched the trailer, I was imagining this really cool, I don't know, maybe, because I think I had seen The Lawnmower Man at the time, which was a kind of, sort of, not really Stephen King adaptation about like virtual reality and stuff. So I think I was expecting something a bit more cyberpunky with this movie, and it's not that. So the movie stars Edward Furlong, you know, the kid from T2 who then disappeared because he had lots of personal problems. Edward Furlong's also one of those guys who, I think he was like 15 or something when he made this movie, where he cannot deliver an authentic line of dialogue to save his life, but because he's playing a kid, it sounds like an authentic kid. So it's bad acting that becomes good acting by accident and by circumstance. But he's a 15-year-old kid, big horror movie fan. He like reads Fangoria in the movie. He has this cool like pixelated Igor computer thing that answers and dials the phone for him that he's programmed, that I think was really cool. And he has a very creepy crush on the girl next door, where he's like a peeping Tom, but he like films her with a camcorder when she's undressing. Now, the movie lets us know that the girl knows he's watching her, and she's kind of doing it on purpose because she also likes him, but neither of them are really talking to each other. But still pretty creepy, and even the main character is like, you perv, or he like admonishes himself for it as well. Very creepy. You couldn't have a protagonist doing that nowadays. That's more of like an 80s protagonist thing, so. And then after his friend tells him about Brainscan, this game where you get to play a murderer, I guess he finds an ad in his Fangoria, and he calls up and he gets the disc mailed to him. So my main problem with this movie is how it portrays playing the video game. So, in the first sequence, because he plays the game 4 times in the movie, in the first sequence, he puts in the disc, there's like a big epilepsy fit in front of his eyes, and then he imagines himself in the eyes of a killer, and you see like a first-person view hand where he has gloves and a knife, and he stabs this guy. But it's like he's not aware that he is him. He thinks he's still an avatar in a video game. But then every subsequent murder, or every time he plays the game after that, he's aware that he's him. And some of the stuff he's not, like, because the idea is that the game like hypnotizes you, kind of, and then you do this stuff almost. But he doesn't seem hypnotized in every future one that he does. Like, he has to go and he has to hide evidence at one point, but he knows he's hiding evidence. But it's like, why did you put on the game if you just need to hide evidence so you're not caught as a killer? You could just go there and do that on your own. You don't have to play the game to cover up footprints. So the movie doesn't have much of an internal logic as far as what the game does to his brain and how much cognitive capacity he has while under the game. A lot of overthinking for a early 90s horror movie. And the early 90s was not a good time for horror movies. Pretty much from 1990 up until Scream came out in 96, it was kind of a dead zone. Candyman came out, and there's some good gems in there. In the Mouth of Madness, Lord of Illusions. There's some good stuff in there, but there's a lot of garbage in there too. And that early 90s post-slasher movie craze, pre-Scream. So there's a lot of junk in there. Even stuff I kind of like from that era, like, yeah, even I kind of like Jason Goes to Hell. Still junk. Junk with good characters. So, probably reading too much into that. But, so here's the thing I did not realize until I watched the movie. And it's because it's something I would not have cared about in 1994. The credited screenwriter on this movie is none other than Andrew Kevin Walker. Andrew Kevin Walker would not become a screenwriting name for another year when a little movie came out in 1995 called Seven, directed by David Fincher. Andrew Kevin Walker wrote that movie, and that has since become, or is since considered one of the best serial killer movies made. Fictional serial killer movies, but it's like usually like that and Silence of the Lambs are kind of said in the same breath. David Fincher obviously made Zodiac, but that's based on a true story, so that's a little different. But Seven, he wrote that. Excellent. He wrote 8mm, that Nicolas Cage movie about snuff films that would have been better if Joel Schumacher didn't direct it. And then he also wrote Sleepy Hollow, the Tim Burton movie that has some really good visuals, but it doesn't really hold up well because it's kind of too silly. He also did an uncredited rewrite on my favorite movie, Fight Club, but because the Writers Guild wouldn't give him credit, David Fincher named 3 cops in the movie, Detectives Andrew, Detective Kevin, and Detective Walker, to kind of give him a backdoor credit. But yeah, I was watching the extras just a couple nights ago. This is the first time I've watched the Blu-ray, by the way. I was watching the extras, and they have an interview with Andrew Kevin Walker, and he was basically working for like this low-rent, like almost like a Roger Corman or Full Moon Charles Band type place, and he wrote the original screenplay for Brainscan, and then he didn't hear anything for years, and then suddenly he sees a commercial and his name is in the credit. So, because it wasn't a Writers Guild thing, because he wasn't a member of the Writers Guild at the time, so there's no one who would have notified him or given him residuals or anything. I don't know if he still gets, he probably gets residuals now. But yeah, it's kind of funny that you wrote a movie and you're not aware that it's made, and then suddenly it's out in theaters and you have a credit to your name. So it's weird that he wrote this. Now, I don't know how much of his work ended up in the final film, mainly because the one big nugget he gives on the extra is that he did not create this character. There is no trickster in his script. It's just a voice on the phone. So somebody else came in for an uncredited rewrite and created what I'm sure the producers hoped would be a franchise character of Trickster, who has a horrible name. I kind of like his design. In the movie, he kind of looks like what's his name? Smith from The Cure. Or kind of looks like Alice Cooper a little bit. Yeah, Robert Smith of The Cure. Yeah, he kind of has like that kind of dress on him. And he kind of cracks bad jokes. He's definitely trying to be like a Freddy Krueger character, or a couple years before this, maybe a Horace Pinker from Shocker kind of a character. Doesn't necessarily come off well, but I kind of like him. But it's kind of interesting that one of the main, the main villain who's on your poster and everything, the original screenwriter didn't create him. So, I guess I was hoping when I based on my imagination of what this movie was from the trailer, I thought this was going to be a bit more video game virtual reality based, that he puts on this virtual reality helmet or whatever, and he ends up killing somebody, but he's controlling something real, and it ends up just that he's kind of hypnotized, but then not really, because he's still doing stuff. So that aspect is probably the major disappointment, is like the rules of the game and how the game is portrayed. Other than that, the movie works pretty well. I don't know why my brain built it up to something based on the trailer, because it's nothing particularly special. People seem to remember it in the horror community. It seems to probably because if they were the age of Edward Furlong's character, then they probably identified with this kid who's into horror. I mean, in the movie, he's kind of a latchkey kid whose father's always out of town, and he seems to have unlimited resources of money in a very big house. But he has a horror club where he shows horror movies in school, and the principal doesn't like him, and it has the kind of like coming of age tropes in there mixed with the horror stuff. It's not particularly violent or gory, so it's not really. It could be darker as far as a horror movie goes, but is doing that sort of light, almost comedy thing with it. But the bulk of the movie is basically that this kid is trying to get himself out of the trouble he's gotten into by playing this game, and then he plays the game to get himself out of the trouble, and it just digs him in more, especially with Trickster kind of double-crossing him a little bit at some points. And then you have this police investigation about these murders in this small town, and you have this very well played cop played by Frank Langella, who's just playing like a kind of a stoic, not too intimidating, but very serious cop who he kind of knows that this kid's involved with it, but he does a good job. There's an angry gun-toting mob vigilante that's trying to go after this killer, and they end up shooting someone innocent. I kind of like that. Look, there's not much to say about the movie, despite the fact that I've rambled on for almost 20 minutes. It's a fun movie. It's very much an early 90s horror movie where it's not very scary. It's heavy on the comedy. It's light on the gore. It plays with modern technology of the time, but doesn't particularly do a good job of it. So it's kind of compromised, but it's a fun watch. I own it. I have fun watching it, but it's nothing special. And it's certainly whatever my 10-year-old brain thought the movie was going to be from watching the trailer, it did not live up to that. And that's why it's kind of fun I wasn't sure if this had happened to anybody else, if anybody has a thing like this where they see a trailer or they hear about a movie and then they build it up in their head or other people build it up for them, and then a long time, and I'm talking years, go by before you actually see the movie, and then what's your response? So there's one more movie I want to make a video like this about. I won't say what it is now, but it's a movie that I saw the trailer for in the early 90s, probably like 91 or 92, and I thought the trailer was amazing, and then I didn't see it. And then years and years would go by where I'd see it in the video store, and nothing was stopping me from seeing it, but I was afraid to watch it because I knew the movie would not live up to my expectations from the trailer. Like, I was old enough to look up reviews, contemporaneous reviews of it. I knew that certain people in the cast kind of put a bad pall on it. So I knew I was not going to like the movie nearly as much as my brain built it up to. So for a while I thought, oh, well, I'll wait till I'm 18 and then I'll watch it. And then that went by. And then I was like, you know what, maybe it's just better to have the movie in my head instead of what the actual movie is. And I forget what age I was when I finally just bit the bullet and watched it. I might maybe 21 or 22, and I was like, fine, let me just watch this movie and get it out of the way. And it's the singular experience for that. Brainscan is a little bit of that, but I didn't build it up nearly as much as this other movie, where I specifically stopped myself from watching it because I knew it would disappoint me, and I didn't want to lose the perfect movie from the trailer that my brain created from it. So I have to see if the movie's streaming anywhere, because I don't own it. But if the movie's streaming anywhere, I will watch it again before I do a video review of it, because that one is a bit more close to me because of how much I built it up and how I specifically avoided watching it for a while, and how the movie turned out. And it's a movie that I'm sure most people do not remember at all. Like, if I were to say the name of that movie right now, 99% of you will have never heard of it before. Whereas Brainscan has, not, I won't say a cult following, but there's a number of horror fans who know it, and enough for Shout Factory to put out a special edition Blu-ray of it that has a fairly decent number of extras. So, yep, that's it. If you've seen Brainscan, leave a comment below about what you thought of it, or if you had an experience kind of similar to this about trailers and, built up expectations, leave that as well. And hopefully I'll be able to find the other movie on streaming and talk about that one.